to stay afloat when it comes to staff. As far as additional interviews, I believe next week we will be holding additional interviews for planning positions, and hopefully we have some candidates out of that pool. Next item is fire recovery. I'm happy to say that we have issued 9 building permits so far for the construction of new single-family homes. That's a combination, I believe, of 5 modulars and 4 standard stick-built homes. We have 14 building permits in queue right now, and the idea is to process those as quickly as possible. We've had 116 properties released to the county from the Army Corps of Engineers. So again, as what was reported last night by Colonel McFadden at the Redwood Valley Community Meeting, we're about 54% complete as far as the Army Corps. So we're entering the rebuilding stage now. And last night in Redwood Valley, there was a community meeting held that primarily focused on rebuilding 101, which was how to navigate through the building permit process. So we provided that to the community last night. With that, that would conclude the director's report. If there's any questions.
I just had one question about the 54% that are released. How is that moving along kind of how you expected?
Well, I guess if we go back in time, we were told that everything would be done by the end of the year. Then it was January. Now they're looking at end of February, possibly first part of March. And I think a lot of it had to do with the contracting issues that the Army Corps had. But we were told last night that the Corps now has contractors in place. They actually have 2 contractors now in Mendocino County. So a lot of it is there were some bumpy starts. The main issue is as these properties are being released, we need to go out and look at them to make sure that they're installing the correct BMPs out onto the site before we accept them. And another issue that's coming up is whether or not they're scraping too much material off the properties. They're supposed to be scraping in 3-inch increments with a maximum of 12 inches. But we find that in some cases, some properties have had scrapes go down as deep as 3 feet and some as 6 feet. So we're trying to work that out with the Corps of Engineers.
Any other questions for the director?
So, yeah, I have a question. We've got some buildings in construction already. Do you have any feel for the availability of contractors to do the construction? Do we have any contractors coming in from outside the area, or?
I don't really have an answer to that question. I think most of the contractors that are right now building in Redwood Valley are local contractors. I know that the North Coast Builders Exchange has really been trying to push for local contractors as much as possible. We keep hearing that there are contractors locally that are going to Sonoma County, but again, I couldn't confirm that.
Sorry. Now is the time for matters from the public. The Planning Commission welcomes participation in commission meetings. This item is limited to matters under the jurisdiction of the commission that are not on the posted agenda and items which have not already been considered by the commission. No action can be taken. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak? Seeing none, we will move on to consent calendar, and there are no items on the consent calendar. So we can go to item UR 2014-003.
Madam Chairman, Mary Lynn Hunt, Planning and Building Services. I just want to, before we start on that project, In your packet, you should have or you've received today, a memo from me regarding a project that was to be continued to today's agenda for MS 2007-23 for the trustees of the Pinole Indians. And that item was inadvertently not placed on the agenda, but it is going to be, I'm not going to say continued, because we are going to reschedule it and renotice it when it comes back for hearing process. And the applicant is aware of this, so that's why it's not on your agenda. Sorry about the mistake. So with that, I'll let Julia take over for the next case.
All right, well, thank you. So I'll go ahead and start. As you've received today in your packet, there is a memorandum and also a red line version of a revised resolution that I'll want to take you through. But first, I'll just go through the project and do a brief summary of the project. Oh, sorry.
Before you start on that,
Sure.
I have performed some work on this particular project, and I think that it constitutes a conflict of interest, so I am going to recuse myself from this.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So I'll go ahead and start right into my presentation, and then feel free to stop me if you have any questions. So the applicant is requesting the continued extraction of rock from the existing Bald Hills quarry, and this would be for a 30-year term. The original permit, use permit 29-93, was for a 20-year permit term, so this will extend that by an additional 30 years. And so mining of the site materials would be phased. And so what would happen is there'll be 3 phases, and the 4th phase will be the implementation of the reclamation and revegetation activities. And the overall end use of this project site will be forest land after reclamation. The proposed reclamation plan would reclaim approximately 12.9 acres of the site with a proposed end use of forest land, as I mentioned. And reclamation at the site would consist of finishing grading of the quarry floors and covering them with overburden and topsoil that was previously removed to uncover the rock outcropping at the quarry pits. At the processing site, the topsoil removed to grade the working area would be returned and recontoured, and then areas with soil cover would be replanted with forest tree species at the mine pits and at the processing site. The rock surfaced forest access road traversing the processing area and the spur access road would remain in place for use by the property owner after the site is reclaimed. So the road will still remain after reclamation has occurred. So this project was referred to various agencies. There were minimal comments submitted back on this project, primarily, I believe, because it's not, the applicant isn't requesting a modification to what was previously approved for this site. We did receive one comment from California Department of Fish and Wildlife related to this project, just acknowledging that if the applicant adheres to the stipulations in condition 12 of the permit that's recommended about timing restrictions relative to blasting, as well as when they would do their processing at the site, then there should be no impacts to sensitive resources. Also acknowledging that if they do any work that is near the stream, it may trigger the need for a 1600 permit, which is a lake and stream bed alteration agreement. So staff conducted an initial study pursuant to CEQA, and through that processing determined that a mitigated negative declaration would be the most appropriate process for this application. So this was primarily based off of 2 hazard issues. The first is about geology and soils. There was a geotechnical report prepared for this project by Crawford and Associates, and it's attachment D in the rec plan. And based upon those recommendations in that report, several mitigation measures were required. These are mitigation measure 1 and 2. These are noted on PC page 7 of the staff report. And so with the inclusion of those, the concerns related to potential hazards for geology and soils are reduced to a less than significant impact. The second hazard area is hazards and hazardous materials, and this is primarily because the site is located in a high fire hazard severity zone. Essentially, what would be required is that during high, very high, or extreme fire danger levels, there would be a water truck filled and on standby at the project site during the equipment use at the quarry, just in case a fire did erupt, and they would have that water available for fire protection. And then lastly, mitigation measure 4 would require that the operator notify Redwood Coast Fire Protection District and CAL FIRE a minimum of 24 hours before performing any blasting. So with that, I will then take you through the memorandum that was distributed for this project. So the first item in the memorandum is about a modification of the findings. And similar to the project that we heard last month for the Blue Ridge Rock Quarry, staff suggests that we add the use permit findings to more explicitly state those, just so that there is no confusion as to whether or not those findings can be made. Secondarily, the modifications of conditions of approval. This is probably the biggest chunk of the memorandum, and similar to the Blue Ridge Rock Quarry, this is really taking a condition that we had, which was condition 8 on this project, that said that this project would be subject to all previous conditions of approval and mitigation measures from the underlying use permit 29-93. So what we've done is essentially take all those conditions in use permit 29-93 and list those out with updated information for the project that's in front of you today. So what that does is modifies condition 1 to include a definitive expiration date, which will be June 18th, 2044. Condition 8 is replaced with a statement that includes the limitations on the amount of extraction that can be performed at the quarry. There was misnumbering within the resolution, so conditions 21 through 25, as was numbered in the resolution that was distributed, are now corrected to be conditions 23 through 27. There had been a duplicate number 21 in the project, so this just corrects that. And then conditions 28 through 40 are the conditions from the underlying permit with the corrected information for this project. That's primarily updating dates about the which SWIP is currently being used for this project, as well as just updating some of the references to the reclamation plan and things such as that. The other item to note is that after I prepared this memorandum, the applicant and I discussed this memorandum, and so as a result, it looks like there's a couple typos in this memorandum. So I'll just want to correct that condition 33, as recommended, on the third line, it says the I can't. That should be the applicant. And that was my mistake when typing this up. And then secondarily, one that's not included in the revised memorandum but is in the resolution is condition 9. And condition 9 references, and let me just find my document here. Condition 9 actually references that we would have to have a extraction, crushing, screening perimeter for the planned project. It's meant to say permit. So this is really related to the Mendocino County Air Quality Management District standards. So that's on condition 9, and it would replace the word perimeter with permit. And then lastly, in meeting with the applicant, they advised me that there was some previous correspondence in the 1993 use permit that had timing restrictions that were different than what is expressed in our condition 12. They're actually more restrictive. So I've found that letter from the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife that was referenced in the previous 1993 permit, and the applicant is correct that in condition 12, the timing restrictions should be revised from April 1st to be February 1st. So that actually makes it more restrictive in terms of when they can perform the blasting activities, but that is consistent with the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife's comments on this project. And that comment letter was from March 7th, 2002. So then with that, that gets me through most of the presentation here. I will just also want to note that the applicant made some comments within the letter that they provided about corrections to be done in the staff report. Staff has reviewed those suggested corrections and agrees with the applicant that those are are true, that those should be corrected within the record, just to acknowledge. Not that there'll be a new staff report issue, but that we'll have it going into the record today that those items are corrected. And then lastly, the applicant has requested that on the resolution, before the "now there be it resolved" and before the next statement, that they insert "based upon the evidence in the record." So that would now read, "Now therefore be it resolved, based upon the evidence in the record, that the Planning Commission makes the following findings." This is also consistent with what we had on the previous use permit that came forward last month for the Blue Ridge Rock Quarry. And lastly, there was one comment letter that came out from a gentleman named Alan Levine, and I believe you have copies of that within your packet. So Mr. Levine had concerns primarily about stormwater related to the access road to the quarry. So I'll just summarize his concerns briefly, and then really leave it at the discretion of the commission here as to whether or not any additional conditions are warranted. So first, Mr. Levine just makes a note that over the years there have been incidents related to the quarry's operation, and that believes that they have had negative impacts on Alder Creek and related beneficial uses. The adverse impacts are sedimentation from sedimentation pond overflows and failures, and road-related impacts from slides, slip-outs, cut bank failures, and other erosion control failures that allowed large quantities of sediment to enter Alder Creek. Mr. Levine feels that these issues have not been fully considered in the environmental document, and that the failure to consider and mitigate these issues raises the legal standard of fair argument, that approval of this project by negative declaration is not acceptable under California Resources Code. Secondarily, he noted that there are no comments in the file from the Department of Fish and Wildlife and/or Regional Water Quality Control Board. And then lastly, his recommendations for the sediment ponds and roads are indicated at the end of his email. And for the sediment ponds, he suggests that there should be a system of managing the sediment ponds by reasonable periodic inspection with increased frequency during high rain events to assure that there will be zero chance of sediment pond failure or overflow. For the roads, he recommends that the road and road-related drainage be looked at by a geologist or qualified expert and assessed for necessary upgrades to comply with Regional Water Quality Control Board standards and potential elimination and control of potential sediment sources. And also recommended that there should be a road management plan. Also suggested would be that there be additional or upgraded operating controls for during wet weather, such as having no puddling that can just discharge fines by wheel movement, so saying that they couldn't be operating when there would be puddling that may cause that, and that the wet weather controls need not be seasonal by nature, but controlled by the amount of rainfall. And request that there be yearly reporting to Mendocino County Planning related to any permit and road condition issues or failures. And then lastly, finds that the project proponents, he acknowledges that they're seeking a 30-year permit term, but considering the issues and the delicate nature of Alder Creek, he recommended a 5 or 10-year permit term to allow these issues to be re-reviewed in a shorter period of time. So with that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Sure.
Grammatically confusing to me. It's suddenly an instruction.
Sure. So it's saying, do not haul rocks products during periods of measurable precipitation and for at least 24 hours after the end of a period of significant precipitation. Yeah. So and then the next sentence goes on to define what significant precipitation is. So this is really about limiting it when there's more than a 1/4 inch rainfall in any 24-hour period.
Right. But it's not, everywhere else it would say the applicant shall not or something, and this says do not.
And this is actually from the underlying use permit, that I use the same language that was in that condition from the underlying use permit, but we can certainly, if you so choose, we could certainly amend that to be more clear.
I don't care.
I have a question on condition 27.
You have to light your light.
Oh,
There you go.
Okay. You had alluded to reviewing back to the Department of Fish and Game, or Fish, well, it was Fish and Game at that time. I think it was 1993, is that what you said?
For the underlying use permit, yes.
Yes. Just out of curiosity, and you may not know, but I see where the fee, once again, from Fish and Wildlife has been increased another $100. Well, a little bit less, $80. I was curious if you knew what the fee was at that time.
Oh, in 1993? Well, let's see. I can actually
Do you
take a
have
look and
that?
see what it was. So let me just find the letter.
This has been a
here.
bone of contention for me ever since I've been on this planning commission because I
Sure.
think it started with, I know, less than $1,000.
And I believe that it was right around $1,000 at that time, but I do have it here. It was $1,275.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Quite a bit of inflation.
It goes up every month.
And what exactly is it that we buy with this money?
So this is actually, the fee
The
actually
applicant
is
buys,
paid by the applicant. It facilitates the filing of the notice of
I
determination.
know, but what is any citizen getting for this money? Do
Be
we
an
know?
excellent question for Fish and Wildlife.
Okay.
Because they rarely make comments in the packet anyway.
Are there any other questions for staff?
Yeah, I do. We learned a lot in October and after about a new, relatively, I think, new category for fire danger, which is called red flag warnings.
Sure.
And it means there's wind involved. And I'm wondering if it would be wise, or if it's too complicated, to incorporate that red flag warning into conditions 18 and 19. Maybe somebody knows more about the difference between the red flag warning and the extreme fire danger rating, but I think it's a wind factor.
Right. I wouldn't see an issue with adding that in. I am not sure myself personally of the definition of the extreme fire danger and whether or not that incorporates red flag warning. Yeah, so I mean that's something I can try to look up real quickly if that would be helpful.
Well, I'm wondering if the red flag warning might even indicate no blasting,
Right.
not just a notice. But because I think I think it does involve wind, and I think it's a pretty extreme condition more than extreme dryness.
Right. Yeah, I'd be happy to take a look at what I can find on the CAL FIRE website as well and see if I can provide a little bit more information about that.
That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would you like us to take a little break here?
You certainly could, or if you'd like, if there's other questions, then I can look at those too. I don't know if anyone else had any other questions for myself.
If I may, through the chair, Nash Gonzalez, why don't we go ahead and finish the presentation and then hear from the applicant, and then perhaps we could take a break to
And
do any research.
Wordsmith that one condition.
And I just had one more question related to the permit expiring in 2014, but it sounds like the quarry's continued its operation since then.
They did submit their renewal prior to the expiration date, so I understand that that does allow them to continue operation.
And if I may, through the chair, it's been the longstanding policy of the department that as long as an applicant submits the renewal application before the expiration date, they are allowed to continue to operate or to work under their old permit until the new permit is taken effect.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Then we'd like to hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm George Rao, the civil engineer for the project, and I think the staff has done an excellent job of presenting it. The one thing I would like to address is the email from Alan Levine, in that I think from the 1993 permit conditions, the new modified conditions are much more comprehensive and strict about both all three sites, the processing site, the quarry, and the roads. So you have 4 or 5 conditions which are specific to those issues. think there's, begin with condition number 30 and go on through lost my place, sorry. Conditions 31, actually begin with condition number 29 and include 30 and 31 and 39, and I would be happy to discuss those in more detail if you'd like. The other issue is that the industrial activities stormwater pollution plan is much more comprehensive and strict than it was in 1993. And that plan is in effect, has been approved by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. It requires monitoring of the sediment ponds, which were specifically mentioned in Mr. Levine's letter. So any rainfall event, the outfall of those ponds have to be monitored. The outfall of any drainage from the quarry has to be monitored. There are no specific sampling points identified along the road, but again, with the conditions that I mentioned, the road erosion must be addressed and must not enter sediment into Alder Creek or even the entering water courses. So I think you have a real good coverage of that issue. As to the term, these permits are very expensive to develop a comprehensive analysis for. And we've found, I've been working on these projects for 40 years almost, and we found that the costs, again, as Marilyn mentioned, just have skyrocketed. We started out probably, I don't know, $5,000 or $6,000, and now we're approaching $250,000 in some of these projects. So I believe it is, you have a comprehensive evaluation of the project, and you have conditions which really are ongoing. They require yearly accounting to the county and yearly reporting to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And anytime there's a problem revealed by the operation, that the resource agencies have the right to enter the project. So I would urge you to continue to use the 30-year period as the time. I have no other comments, and I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
I have just one. Have the best management practices changed significantly since the 93 permit? I mean, how you prevent sedimentary outfall or whatever sort of thing?
They haven't changed materially. However, the monitoring and reporting of them has certainly become much more comprehensive. In the, in 93, we had a sediment pond required in 1993, and that pond was tweaked a couple of times between then and now to make it function better. And now we have monitoring requirements, so if there's overflow from the sediment pond, we have to actually sample and monitor the outfall. It has to meet standards. There's some standards set, so it's not like you monitor it and it goes away. You actually have to report online to the Regional Water Quality Control Board if any of the standards are exceeded. If they're exceeded 3 times, you basically have a violation. So the first time you're supposed to report what you've done to correct the situation. Second time, the same thing. Third time, you've got a violation to deal with. So it's much more comprehensive than it was in 1993.
Yes. It was mentioned there was a problem with lack of maintaining the erosion controls in the past. Was it a different operator than this operator?
It was a different operator at the time.
That would explain some differences, maybe?
It might. I mean, these are dynamic systems, and any operator may have problems just due to the storm intensity or whatever. So I would not say that there was a lack of attention necessarily. That operator did correct the situation and improved it.
Any other questions?
Comment and a question. Thank you for explaining the monitoring and reporting, and I'm wondering if that might address some of the concerns raised in this letter here from Mr. Levine. Will he or others, will the public have access to those reports?
I believe it is, because it's uploaded to the to the web, and I believe that you can register and actually review the process of reporting as it's ongoing. I tried to do that myself, and I'm not very good at getting into the web, so I couldn't find the project I was looking for, but I believe it's possible, yes.
Okay, great, because I'm hoping that these concerns are already addressed in here, but he needs to have that assurance that they are, and so, you know, if they have access to it, I'm wondering if that might help solve the problem.
Right, and that was my intent, was to try and point out the specifics.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One more question.
Yes.
Yeah, I have one more vague problem, and that is the vicinity to the San Andreas fault. I realize the fault line doesn't go through the property, but it's only 3,500 feet away, which to me seems kind of close. But I've read the report. I understand the rock is hard, the face slope will be safe, but I sure wouldn't want to be an operator there in a big earthquake on the San Andreas fault.
Neither would I.
Yeah.
No, but there is an error. It's not 3,500 feet. It's actually 2 miles, which may not make a lot of difference, but it makes some.
Yeah, it does.
And the other thing that's been, this analysis of the geology is much more comprehensive and actually strict than the prior one, in that we actually had the geology firm, engineering geology firm, Crawford and Associates, do safety analysis, which went through the Office of Mines Reclamation. And they had to come up with safety factors for the slopes, which made the slopes more flatter than previously approved. So it actually reduced the amount of mineable rock in the configuration of the quarry. But those slopes, and then you have a couple of conditions. I think it's number. Those slopes are not only evaluated initially, but there's an ongoing requirement for their evaluation as the quarry mining progresses. And those are. Number 16 and number 17, yes. So that you have some ongoing monitoring as the project progresses. It's not just a one-time review.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
If I may, through the chair, Mr. Rao is correct that there's monitoring requirements have actually been more emphasized now in recent years, and I would point out that in 2013 the annual inspection SMARA report was modified to really force the lead agencies, inspectors, engineers, geologists to ask more and more questions when it comes to the annual monitoring and inspection of these sites. In the past, before 2013, it was merely 8 check boxes on the report, and one could say that a lot of things were not looked at or missed. Now what it does, it forces the lead agency to actually go out and take a look at cut slopes. It looks at BMPs, it looks at the conditions of approval, it looks at many different things, although some inspectors have been doing this for years, other inspectors did not. But what we've seen is a significant change in the questions that are asked. And so because these reports are now filed, well, have always been filed with the state, but it also forces the state to start looking at everything much more closely. The other thing too is a concern was raised regarding the earthquake fault, and I'll call it working conditions. MSHA, which is the Mine Safety and Health Administration, it's a federal agency, they review and inspect mines periodically, if not multiple times a year. They're actually looking for safety issues. They look for cut slopes. They look for berms that are established in the field. Anything that would put a miner in a safety compromising situation. And that could be anything from the equipment to the actual slopes in the field. So within the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, there's more scrutiny on a lot of these permits compared to what used to be back 25, 30 years ago.
And this scrutiny is performed by state and federal agencies, or is there any local component to that?
Well, there is a
Inspection.
state, federal, there's also the local. So the annual SMARA inspection is done by the local agency, by the county. And currently the county is working with Lako and Associates, who has a geologist go out into the site and take a look at these. So some of the things that they look at is, are they complying with the conditions? Are they complying with the actual cut slopes? But the annual inspection also allows for even the planning department to say, I think I see a problem with that slope. We want you to have that inspected and looked at by a geologist or engineering geologist, and that could be called at any point in time. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the conditions of approval. It's what is believed to be an issue out there. And sometimes you have slopes that might be failing. And so to an inspector that actually has that ability to see that, they could actually say, I'd like to have a geologist look at it. And the operator would have a geologist go out and take a look at it. And it's a typical thing where an inspector would say, submit a report within 6 months so we can review it, or before the next inspection, just to give everybody peace of mind that the slopes are not failing. So there's a lot more scrutiny today than there was 25 years ago.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Rao or for the staff? Okay, thank you. Then we will open the public hearing on this matter. And if there are any members of the public who wish to address this item, please step forward now. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Bring it back to the commission.
Well, in spite of some of my worries, I think that it's a pretty tidy project, and I'm reassured with the words of our director and Mr. Rao that there will be inspections and people will be held accountable.
Wouldn't care to make any motions?
Well, wasn't Julia going to make a change? In addition?
Oh, that's right. You had to.
Oh, yeah. I wondered about that. That's right.
So I've just been looking, and of course trying to navigate CAL FIRE's website quickly is always a challenge, but it looks like at least the red flag warnings, how they have it defined is they do use the term extreme as sort of, it appears to be somewhat interchangeably. I wouldn't see an issue with including red flag warning specifically in conditions 18 and 19, primarily, even though they're included in the CEQA document, if they're more restrictive, you are able to make modifications to those mitigation measures. Now, my one concern would be that, without having any comments from CAL FIRE, making sure that that is accurate on it, and I'm not sure if the director or county council has an opinion on that either.
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski. I was looking monitoring the conversation as well, and as far as I can tell, it's the National Weather Service who issues a red flag warning. They're using weather issues beyond just looking at brush, and it's the high, very high, or extreme is a forestry term. I'm not sure if it's federal or state, or if we follow the state on that. So I can't give you any certainty as to how those interact. If there was a desire to take a extra minutes and talk with the applicant to see if they have any issues on a prohibition on red flag warnings, but I'm not sure I can give you, a 100% final answer, right now over, unless the applicant's fine with that additional requirement of not blasting on a red flag warning day. Because right now the fire condition would just read for high, very high, or extreme, and my assumption, that's all I can offer right now, is that a red flag would automatically be at an extreme status, but I can't speak to that with any better basis than it seems appropriate. But then you say beyond the idea that they couldn't, they have to have things on site and would be telling the fire agencies they're going to be blasting. If we wanted to import a secondary standard for a complete prohibition, that's possible, but we want to, I think, talk to the applicant about that.
Want to comment, George.
Madam Chair, I'd like to introduce Dennis Tebow, who's from Mendocino Redwood Company, and he understands this situation.
My name is Dennis Tebow. I'm the Executive Vice President of Forestry for Mendocino and Humboldt Redwood Companies. I'm responsible for our operations on all of our timberlands, whether they're this rock pit or our forestry operations. I tell you that to just give you some perspective on my background. I'm a registered professional forester. I've been in the business about 25 years. I'm going to tell you what I understand about these systems and throw in the caveat that there's always people smarter than me out there. But the fire danger rating system is a generic system, and there's multiple ways that, you know, the Forest Service has a fire danger rating system. So I would agree that that finding is ambiguous in that it doesn't identify a specific fire danger rating system. The red flag warning is a specific fire danger rating system. You can get a red flag warning for dry lightning, for low humidity or high wind forecasts. And so we don't have any issue with restrictions for, you know, that are based on a higher level of preparedness, but quite often a red flag warning really isn't. Like, for example, a red flag warning for dry lightning would not be necessarily something we'd want to shut down the operation for. And low humidity that close to the coast is probably less of a concern because those red flag warnings can be for western Mendocino County. So, I mean, I think that's a smart way to put in some mitigations for fire danger. I think that we'd probably, based on, you know, how often those are issued, that's a restriction that might be overly prescriptive and restrictive, but, you know, I doubt that it will have that significant of an impact. So if that's a quick change that we make today just to be done with this so we don't have to revisit it, we'd be okay with that. Sure.
Do you think that if a red flag warning were in effect when the fire agency was notified that there was going to be blasting occurring, they might come back to you and say, no, it's too windy?
Likely. I mean, what they would do is they would typically, if we gave them a notification of an operation like that, then they would want to know, what do you have on site? And so that's typically how you would interact with CAL FIRE on a one-off project like this. You'll give them a notification. They'll query you a little bit about, do you have a water truck on site? How many people how many firefighters would you have available? So you have a fire plan for operations like that. And someone with a blasting permit also has those regulations that govern their issuance of the blasting permit and what fire precautions they have to have on site as well. Mm-hmm. So it's a good question. You know, this pit is what, 3 miles off the coast, two miles off the coast. So it's in what's typically a relatively low fire danger to begin with. But I do agree that there's ambiguity in just saying the way that that's written, because it's just referencing a generic concept as opposed to a specific rating system. So.
Okay. Yes.
Madam Chairman, I'm less concerned because my vision, at least, is when you're blasting, you know, you drill a hole in the rock, you put your dynamite, your blasting material in there, and it's not like it's near grass or near trees. It's in the middle of a quarry, you know, which is solid rock. So I'm not real concerned about it. I would probably vote for it anyway, but I just don't see that it's a large risk. I'm no expert, but that's the way I view it.
If I may, through the chair, just a little bit about blasting. Blasters are heavily regulated by ATF and law enforcement, as well as the fire agencies. So typically, a blaster will look at weather conditions. They will look at many different issues before they even blast. So it's not just that they're going to go out and blast on any given day. They plan the blast, and usually like Mr. Nelson says, they drill into the ground, into the rock, and they use a fertilizer-based blasting substance. And really all they're looking at is fracturing the rock. They don't want to explode or implode. What they want to do is a low-level blast to fracture the rock so that they can go in and remove it, because if you do it wrong and you blast, you lose your rock. And you break up the rock so that it is unusable. If they fracture the rock, then they can easily manipulate the rock when they remove the rock, and it becomes a better product. So again, they are subject to many different regulations. In fact, it is one of the most overly regulated aspects of the mining industry, and a lot of it was because of 9/11. So we find that blasters now, there's very few of them because of 9/11, but those that are out there are heavily regulated.
Well, that was a good reminder. I guess I had something in my mind about imploding a building and how things scatter off site sometimes, even though they don't want them to.
Typically at a blast, what you'll get is this small, and that's it. You don't even see the rock fly or anything. It's just a vibration that can be actually felt using what do they call it, a seismograph. It's just a small little shake, but that's all they're doing, is they're just trying to break the rock underneath the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I do concur with Commissioner Nelson, and at the same time, I feel that if we're making the effort to include conditions on this approval, we should have them be useful. And seems like the more specific, the less gray area, and the more clear, the more useful. So that might be the reason why I would be interested in modifying condition 18, not because I'm actually concerned about fire danger, because it sounds like all of those safety mechanisms and protocols are truly in place. And so I do wonder about adding in, including red flag warnings or taking into account red flag warnings, just so that it is more specific. And I'm curious if there's other thoughts on that.
That would satisfy me. I don't think there's a need to prevent the blasting in the condition. But to have the term included seems safe.
It looks to me like we just need to put "and" red flag warning in there.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
And if I may, through the chair, I did find a document that is from the CAL FIRE website that just has some clarification on fire terminology. If I may, I'll
Yes.
read what they have here. So this says, the National Weather Service, this is about fire weather watch and red flag warnings is the heading here. So it says, the National Weather Service initiates the process if they believe weather conditions could exist in the next 12 to 72 hours, which may result in extreme fire behavior. They will notify the fire service of a fire weather watch. A red flag warning is issued for events that will occur within 24 hours. These watches and warnings are called because of a combination of high temperatures, low humidity, and high winds. They can also be issued when there is a possibility of dry lightning. The concern is that if a fire starts in those conditions, it has a better chance of spreading very rapidly and erratically. They note that this red flag warnings were in effect in the 1991 Oakland Hills fire and the 2003 and 2007 fire sieges. And then they go on to say that each CAL FIRE unit has its own plan for how to react to these conditions. They may increase their dispatch levels, cancel days off, order volunteer patrols, cancel burning permits, etc. So that's really what they've provided as a little bit more information about it. So it seems like it's really initiated by the National Weather Service, and then CAL FIRE responds. Sounds like each unit would respond a little differently to the circumstances, probably depending on their area and really what may be the more localized conditions.
Right.
So if we added that language, we would just be asking them to pay attention to those national warnings.
Right.
And is the applicant satisfied with that?
Yes.
If we do add that, thank you.
I mean, I would suggest that you delete the fire danger rating language and just say during red flag warning conditions, the operator shall ...
Well, do we really want to get rid of the high, very high, and extreme fire danger? Because that is,
Well, there is no.
you're saying that's kind of meaningless.
According to who, I guess.
Yeah.
Could you come up to the microphone so we can get you on officially
Yeah.
here?
My only question as someone who would be involved in the operations is where would we go to look up high, very high, or extreme? You haven't given us a location, a fire danger rating according to who. If you said when the National Weather Service issues a red flag warning, the operator shall, then it's really clear. So I agree with what you're saying, that it's,
Making it
as it's written, I don't know how we would look that up.
So maybe we need to refer to the National Weather Service and the CAL FIRE website as.
I have some suggested language that I think could address all of this, and it's just minor things. So if we leave during high, very high, and extreme, or during red flag warnings, fire danger levels as determined by CAL FIRE, the operator shall have a water truck, and then just keep everything. All we're doing is just saying red flag warnings and is determined by CAL FIRE, because as Julia pointed out, each CAL FIRE district is going to be different. And what is different in Ukiah is going to be different on the coast, because as the applicant has pointed out, humidity levels could be much higher on the coast compared to what they are inland. In fact, we do see this every year during the summer. The coast will be fogged in while Ukiah is 100 degrees over here. So I think if we, for the Planning Commission's comfort, if you just added after the word extreme or during red flag warnings or during red flag warnings, fire danger rating levels as determined by CAL FIRE.
That acceptable, Ron? Acceptable, the applicant agrees?
Through the chair, I was working on language
Yes.
with looking at Nash, and I think I would, if we're going to do this, I'd probably replicate this in 18 and 19, since it's the same standard as written right now.
Right.
Just to separate the responsibilities a little more clearly in terms of who issues what, I might recommend during high, very high, and extreme fire danger rating levels as determined by CAL FIRE, or during a red flag warning as issued by the National Weather Service, the operator shall, and that would refer to those. And if we're going to do this, I try and make sure we're being clear who issues what.
That work for everyone?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a good improvement.
Motion.
Basically, I make the recommended motion with the change in the language at the beginning that you suggested and the language that Matt just read us.
And one, sorry to interrupt, one last question. You raised, Commissioner Hall, the issue of due to shall in the one condition. I don't know that we got direction from the commission on that change in particular.
I would include shall.
I think we need another little word that would say the operator shall not haul rock. Or aren't we looking at 30A?
Oh, I'm on 18 and 19.
But the change I'm referring to is in number 30A,
30A.
that we discussed earlier.
And what was the language on that?
The operator shall not haul rock products
Yes.
during periods.
Okay. You good on your motion?
Yes, I'm good on my motion, and that is, I intended to do that.
We need a second.
I'll second it.
Roll call. Recused.
He's recused.
That's right, sorry about that. Commissioner Nelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Commissioner Ogle,
Yes.
Commissioner Warner,
Yes.
Commissioner Purnell.
Yes.
Chair Holtcamp,
Yes.
motion carries 6-0.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
You know, I think the county could probably make more money if they charged by the pound.
They pay the post office by the pound.
But can you imagine trying to get your way through a reclamation plan online?
Wow, no. But there was some good information in this.
Yeah.
Very good information.
Are there any other matters from staff?
None, Madam Chair.
Any matters from the commission? I have one briefly, just a reminder to everyone, you got a notice in the email about your Form 700, don't forget. Okay.
Do we know our schedules coming up for meetings coming up?
We will have that at the next meeting for you.
Are we meeting the 1st of next month, do you think? We are.
Mhm.
So maybe you could email that to us ASAP, and then we'll get a hard copy at the next meeting.
I'm emailing the next meeting's material tomorrow. I'm mailing it out, so you'll all get it in the email then and also receive it.
Okay, thank you.
And the next meeting is when?
February
February
1st.
The first Thursday of February.
Yeah, which is, I believe, February 1.
Correct.
Oh, we
Doesn't
need
show
a
it
little
there.
changes up there.
And I would just like to make a comment. I will be available for the next meeting, but I will not be available again until probably April 19th if we have a meeting then.
Any other matters from commission? Then I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So
I
moved.
move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you.